Hello, Charlene. We're about probably 8 minutes away from getting started. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Kelly, I don't know if this is set up to allow you to use your screen right now or not. Do you have, nope, I don't think you do.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Okay, I'm going to make you the host if I can. That way you can control everything on your end.
Okay.
There we go. So you should be, I think, the host now, Kelly.
Okay. Thank you.
And welcome, Addie. We're going to start here in about 6 minutes. Hey, Charlene, where is the Muslim Community Primary School? Is that in Belize City?
Yes, sir. In
Okay.
Belize City Corner, Central American Boulevard and Forbes Road.
Okay, very good. And Addie, good to see that. I know Sacred Heart, I think Furman is coming and staying at my house a couple of days this summer. I'm looking forward to seeing him.
Oh, wow. Good afternoon, everyone. That should be nice. Actually, Mr. Furman invited us to this meeting.
Okay, yeah, very good. This is good. Yeah, I invited or sent the invite to all the deans in Belize, and then we have a number of individuals also here in the U.S. that have been invited as well. So welcome.
Thank you.
I think we're getting it for the most part, but if you get on there, if you want to type in the chat your name and the institution that you are representing, that would be good. Need to start putting some light music on so it's not just silent as we're waiting up to the point. All right, so guys, it is 3:30 is starting time. I want to introduce our presenter here in just a moment, but I'm also going to put some context in here for our presenter. We invited, there's invitations that went out to several school districts in Texas that are part of the East Texas Center for School-Based Research and Instruction. But we went ahead and sent out as well to the individuals that are part of the Center for Central American and Caribbean Initiatives, and a lot of the deans in Belize received this and came through and shared with some of their faculty so that they understand, so that they can see what's going on. So this particular Ed Talk, by the way, is set up. It is really kind of came from a superintendent one time asked me, how do we make kids think? And so I've kind of had that in my notes for a while, and I can think of no better person to begin to address that issue is Kelly Dyer. And Kelly Dyer is an instructional coach at the University Academy Laboratory Schools here at UT Tyler. And that particular laboratory school focuses on STEM education through project-based learning. And project-based learning in a lot of ways, it's more than just students building projects, because you can do that in ways that are way too superficial. You've got to get into some depth into what you do. And I really liked what Kelly, she titled her talk here, Encouraging Critical Thinking Through Questioning and Productive Struggle. And she doesn't know that, but I've used the comment productive struggle probably about half a dozen times since she sent that in, because I like the way that sounds. When you're working with students, they need to feel success, but you only grow in situations where you step outside of that comfort zone and you have that, what she would call productive struggle. So I want to introduce Kelly Dyer, turn it over to her. And not only is she an instructional coach, she'll be the director of the University Academy Tyler Laboratory School next year. So Kelly, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Hickey. Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's, I don't know what the weather's like everywhere. It's kind of muggy outside right now for us, but let me see. Let me make sure that you guys can see my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, we can see it, Kelly.
Okay. So I wanted to talk to you guys about how we make students think, and then different ways to approach that. So a lot of times you will hear people talk about, or in education, you will hear definitely questioning is one way. But we really have to focus on getting students to, or explicitly teaching students to think, and what that looks like. So some metacognitive activities where they're really thinking about how they're thinking. So I wanted to start with a video just because I always like to start with the why and the reasoning behind it. let me, so Brian Oshiro is a education researcher, and then also he goes around to different schools and does evaluations for teachers. And so that's kind of his background, because I didn't, this isn't the whole video, it's only part of the video. So I wanted to kind of give you a background of who he is before I show the video.
Responsibility on their own. When it comes to something as important as critical thinking, then it's all of our collective responsibility in order to push students forward. In other words, when it comes to creativity, the door doesn't just shut when the school day ends. And as the parent of school children myself, it got me thinking about the following question. How can we better support critical thinking and creativity in schools by asking better, deeper questions outside of them? Now, as we know, we can study easier questions, we can answer easier questions, and this is great for exams. But as participants in society, we all know that we have to deal with questions that are a lot more complicated than those found on a multiple choice test. In reality, right, and we can see here, real life is a bunch of squiggles. There is not necessarily a blueprint that tells us how to get from A to B. And so with this type of situation, it's important that we expose our students to a degree of uncertainty in their classes and not just wait until they have to experience it for themselves for the first time outside of the classroom. You know, these days we send our kids to piano practice at age 4, maybe soccer practice at age 5, maybe they learn English at 3 months, I don't know, it's getting earlier and earlier these days. But one of the reasons why we do this is to give students an opportunity to learn some subjects or to be exposed to things that they normally wouldn't be able to do outside of the classroom. So when it's something as important as critical thinking at stake, does it not also make sense to expose our students to these tougher questions earlier when the stakes are not as high? Now, when we ask tougher questions, such as why questions, it's a lot more difficult. And it's difficult for a number of different reasons. And one reason it tends to be difficult is that in answering a why question, students need to put themselves out there. There's a risk there. There's a risk that, well, maybe they feel they won't say the right thing, or maybe they'll be judged by their classmates. But we need to do a better job of encouraging this and instilling in our students the grit necessary to be able to persevere against challenging topics that come their way. And so what schools need to then do a better job of, because we assume to a certain degree that in school, students are able to connect the dots for themselves. In other words, we assume that they can take whatever knowledge that they learn in school and somehow be able to figure out how to use it outside of it. But this assumption is dead wrong. And in fact,
So what he really comes across and what it and is making the point of is that we've got to teach our students how to think. And so that's really the goal of this presentation, is to dig into how do we do that? How do we teach our students to critically think? Because we can provide them opportunities to critically think, but they're not going to get there without us making those connections, for helping them learn to make those connections and practicing those skills within the classroom, so that when they are out in society, they have those critical thinking skills. So let's start with defining critical thinking. So according to the Foundation for Critical Thinking is self-guided, self-disciplined thinking, which attempts to reason at the highest level of quality in a fair-minded way. And so I think the key part of that definition is that it's self-guided and self-disciplined thinking, especially the self-guided part, so that when you come across a question or you come across a problem, and you're trying to solve it, you realize that there's multiple different approaches that you can take to solve the problem. And so critical thinkers do multiple things, but if you have a student, if you're looking to identify students that are doing well with critical thinking, they will do things like raise vital questions and problems. They will on their own be able to gather and assess relevant information using abstract ideas to interpret it effectively. Also, they can come up with well-reasoned conclusions. Also think open-mindedly. So going into a problem, not thinking that there's only one solution. And that's something that I'll talk about later, that when we give our students problems or give them questions, we want them to be comfortable with the fact that there are multiple different solutions. But that is something that we have to expose them to and teach them how to do. And then they're also able to communicate effectively with others in trying to figure out those solutions. So collaboration and learning to work together to solve a problem is very important in developing critical thinkers. So in order to set the stage for critical thinking, we have to really look at the different types of thinking, because if we're going to allow students the opportunity and to practice critical thinking and to have different solutions to problems, then we want to make sure that they are also approaching it in different ways. So they're using different types of thinking. So there are 3 different types of thinking that you can focus on. Insightful thinking, which is when you imagine and seek out a variety of possible goals, assumptions, and interpretations or perspectives. And so the main point of that is, what is the larger context or big picture? So when you're working with your students and you're trying to get them to think in an insightful way, then you're really asking them to look at all the components you're looking at and what's the big picture, what's the overall thing that's in common, or how does this one thing fit into the context of this thing. And then there's rational thinking. So this one is when you're analyzing the logical connections among the facts, goals, and implicit assumptions relevant to a problem or a situation. So you're really looking at what are the major components necessary to sequences or orders which structure this problem or situation. So using that rational thinking to break down the problem and figure out what the actual problem is. And then there's evaluative thinking. So recognizing and articulating the feelings and value assumptions which underlie and affect decisions. So for this, it's asking, when we set this stage and we're asking them to be evaluative in their thinking, we're asking them what feels most important to you in this situation and why is it important. So they're evaluating the situation and then applying it to themselves in a real world scenario. So once you have the stage set for critical thinking and trying to think through all of those things, there's specific teaching strategies that we can use to promote critical thinking. And I have the little symbols next to each one of them, because throughout the presentation, I will come back to these four strategies and talk about where they fit into what we're talking about, because you don't necessarily use all of them all the time, but within your classroom, you've got to get them in there in different ways and make sure that you have a wide variety of them throughout the year or throughout your course. So one thing to do to always make sure that you are promoting critical thinking is to not always jump in to help. And this is where productive struggle comes in. And we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about productive struggle. And then always have the students brainstorm before everything that they do. So you present them with a problem or you present them with a question, they need to brainstorm it, give them time. We talk about wait time a lot. I know, especially with teaching new teachers, wait time is very difficult because the silence is very difficult. However, it's important, And so we need to make sure that we're using things like knows and need to knows and KWL charts and things like that to have them brainstorm so they can really dig into the meat of the question and they can hear other perspectives. Also helping them make connections. So questioning them to help them see the connections promotes critical thinking within the classroom. And then collaboration. Collaboration is important, and you will see it throughout this talk, because they need to be able to talk. Students need to be able to talk about their thinking. I'm sure many of you have experienced, I know I do, that when I'm really struggling with something, then if I can sit down and just kind of talk through it with someone, they may not even respond to me, may not say anything, may not have good advice. But because I've talked through it and I've had a conversation about it, I can almost work through the problem on my own. So when I was doing the presentation, I really went back and forth because I'm thinking, well, there's two major components to facilitating critical thinking. I mean, there's 4 scenarios where you have to make sure it's to set it up and to promote critical thinking, but there's 2 very big ones. And as I'm sitting there and I'm trying to outline my presentation and trying to figure out exactly the best way to frame everything, I kept going back and forth. Do I start with the questioning or do I start with the productive struggle? Because you have to set questions in order to give them an opportunity to have productive struggle, but then you also can't have them do productive struggle without additional questioning, because at that point, if you're not questioning and guiding, it's no longer productive struggle, it's just frustration, and they'll give up and get discouraged. So, and of course it was Easter and there's lots of plastic eggs laying around. So I had the, is it the chicken or the egg when it comes to questioning and productive struggle? And I ended up seeing it more like this. We start with providing an opportunity for questioning, and then providing an opportunity by asking a question, then giving them time for productive struggle. But as we're watching them go through productive struggle, we bring in more probing questions to help guide them through. But never are we jumping in and just giving answers, because that does not promote or teach critical thinking. It just it actually, as a teacher, it is very natural for us to want to jump in and help and just give them the answer, because we want to be very helpful and we want them to feel successful. But if someone has to give me the answer to something, I don't really feel successful. I really felt like, well, I guess I couldn't have figured that on my own, so the teacher had to tell me. And kids feel the same way. So by us questioning them to get them to the answer on their own, it builds confidence and it teaches them the skills of critical thinking. So what is productive struggle? I've said it multiple times. Dr. Hickey brought it up at the very beginning. Productive struggle is an effortful practice that goes beyond passive reading, listening, or watching. Another way to look at productive struggle is to look at it through, as students engage with a task, they must be mindful about the strategy they employ and assess whether it is productive. When they find they are at a dead end, they must be willing to abandon one strategy for another. So basically, they are struggling with someone or with something, but they're not giving up, and they're realizing that this didn't work, so I'm going to try this. You see it when you watch kids play video games all the time. They very rarely give up. They will push and push. They will die on the video game, and then they will come back and try a different route. For some reason, just like Brian mentioned in the video, they're not making the connection that we can do the same thing with a math problem, or we can do the same thing with a research paper, or we can do the same thing with a science lab. They don't make that connection that the productive struggle that they experience on their video games is also the same productive struggle that they could make them successful on real world problems or your classroom assignments. So creating a culture of productive struggle, there's some key components. And then here our images have popped up again. One, as a teacher, you need to plan for productive struggle. And we're going to go into each one of these, but we need to plan for productive struggle. We need to provide opportunities for peer collaboration. We need to make sure that we're reading the room. And when we say that, productive struggle is not and never will be, I'm going to give you this very, very hard problem, and then I'm going to go sit behind my desk and get on my computer while you struggle through it. And what ends up happening from that is that the student shuts down. It's no longer productive struggle. It's just struggle and defeat. And then also we need to unpack productive struggle. We need to let them know what productive struggle is, talk about productive struggle. Let them see you have productive struggle. Let them know that you still, as an adult, go through productive struggle, because those things are, it's just like a growth mindset. As a teacher, I want to show that I have a growth mindset. I want to be a model for someone who has a growth mindset. I also want to be a model for my students as someone who, if I run into a problem with my smartboard or I run into a problem with my computer, they see me work through and problem solve. I don't just give up. So having those conversations and unpacking productive struggle for them so that they really have a true understanding of what productive struggle is. How do you plan for productive struggle? One, you have to make sure that it's built in, that you're providing plenty of time for students to struggle with the task. So yes, productive struggle, inquiry learning, all of those things do take a little more time. However, you have a much larger return on investment when you do this, because if they're sitting and getting, they're not truly formulating and truly thinking through the problem that they're trying to solve. They might be following steps, but they're not thinking through and really contextualizing and formalizing those skills that they're learning as they would if they're struggling through a task on their own. You also need to plan for how you will respond when students are struggling. They are going to struggle, and sometimes it's hard. It's no different than when you're a parent. It's hard to watch your kids struggle, but you have to let them go through that because they need to learn that. You want them to learn that while you're there. Same as a teacher. You want them to experience struggle and to experience a level of something that is very hard while you're there to help guide them and teach them those skills. So you need to have those scaffolded questions and support ready. That way, if most of the class starts veering into frustration and unproductive struggle, you already know what you're going to do to steer them in the right direction. So a great way to do that as a teacher is to make sure you go into the lesson already knowing what common misconceptions are for that specific topic. And then also plan for opportunities for students to ask their own questions, help each other, and share how they move through a struggle during the task. So you want to provide opportunities for the students to share how they approach the problem, or how they research to answer a question, or how they designed or created and what was behind the design and creation. Have them share that with each other so that the students can see that this student approached it completely different than I did, but we really got either similar solutions or maybe not similar solutions, but they both worked. So allowing them to really talk about it, because they need to learn that there's multiple ways to approach something and multiple ways to view something. Providing opportunities for peer collaboration. This is a great tool when you're planning for productive struggle to already have in place a system within your classroom where you know that, okay, I'm going to give this problem or I'm going to pose this question, and then they're going to really struggle through it and try to work on it, and that can be individually, but then I'm going to allow them to pair up, because I may only understand one portion of the solution, but my partner may have another viewpoint that will help me get further along. So allowing them to collaborate and also realizing that they are all struggling. That's another key point, that when I'm sitting with my paper and I'm individually working through a problem and I'm struggling, it's just human nature for me to think, well, I must not be smart, or I'm stupid because I can't figure this out. But when we bring everyone together and they realize that I'm not the only one in the class that's not getting this, and it's a hard problem and we're all going to struggle through it together so that we can find an answer, that normalizes productive struggle, and it normalizes not knowing something and it being okay not to know something, as long as you're working to find the answer. And as a teacher, you want to make sure you're reading the room. So you're creating a culture of productive struggle. It requires monitoring and responding to students' needs. So this is something that, and Dr. Hickey kind of touched on it a little bit when he first started talking about projects. This is something that is a huge misconception with project-based learning, is that I'm going to give you an entry document and I'm going to tell you, what you're going to create. And then I'm just here to cheer you on and make sure that you are feeling successful as a teacher. There's so much more that goes into it, and you need to make sure that you're actually using facilitating questions and that you are engaged and really paying attention to where the students are, and looking for body language and looking for signs that they're reaching that frustration level, because you don't want them to get to the frustration or unproductive struggle level. You want to catch them before they get there and just guide them a little bit so that they don't get stuck. And then unpacking productive struggle. We have to be explicit about what struggle looks like and feels like. That's what I mentioned before. So make sure and take some time to share your productive struggle goals. So what goals do you have for your classroom when it comes to productive struggle? Discuss what perseverance is and recognize students who demonstrate perseverance. Recognize students who think of out-of-the-box solutions. Recognize students who failed, not necessarily on a grade failed, but maybe they tried something, it didn't work, and they tried something else and it did work. Recognize the fact that they tried something and it didn't work, but they didn't give up and they kept going and they were able to find a solution, instead of just recognizing the correct answer. And then allow them to share their experiences with perseverance and what that felt like, and how they felt throughout, even letting them keep a journal as they're working and learning new content on kind of how they feel. So if they're doing a reflection at the end, well, how did you feel about what you learned today? And they may be able to look over time that I was very frustrated, or today I hated math, or today I hated reading. But as they get more comfortable with it, then those feelings may change. I wanted to show this video because it's very difficult with a PowerPoint slide and me talking through it for you to see the whole process and how it goes. So I have two videos built in, one that kind of walks you through the steps of posing a problem and allowing the students to have productive struggle, and then questioning the students through it. And then another video towards the end that actually shows a teacher working with, or some teachers working with students, guiding them through productive struggle. So I'm going to play this video and be looking for the key things that we talked about. The times where the teacher's not jumping in and saving them, that they're allowing peer collaboration, that they're making connections, and that they are, I just went blank on the last one, so that they're making connections, and then they're also sharing their productive struggle.
This is Diana with You Can Do the Rubik's Cube. This presentation is about productive struggle and growth mindset. First of all, what is productive struggle? Productive struggle is a process of effortful learning. An example of what this may look like in a math class would be to start the lesson by presenting the students with a new type of problem and giving them independent work time to study and try their own methods to attack the problem. Independently, then maybe in pairs and small groups. What is key here is to allow them the opportunity to try their own strategies and skills before doing anything that is teacher-focused. This is important because it prioritizes the student-centered portion of the lesson. Students see that they have the power to control their own learning. It also builds authentic engagement. Students get invested in the problem. Productive struggle tasks create opportunities for assessment, intervention, and feedback. Consider the task of creating the checkerboard pattern on a Rubik's Cube. In watching students attack this problem, you'll be able to see if students are able to visualize the turns needed to create the pattern, if they have any problems keeping the orientation of the cube the same throughout the process, and then if they can think backwards to undo the pattern. Productive struggle is not the fastest way to an answer, so these tasks build a student's perseverance. If I presented a new problem to my students, for example, asking them to find the area of the classroom, the fastest way to get an answer would be to give them the formula, area equals length times width. However, letting students grapple with the task themselves will build perseverance and deeper engagement. The Mind Research Institute lists 8 habits that promote productive struggle. I've highlighted ones that particularly apply to solving the Rubik's Cube. Number 2, praise students for perseverance in problem solving. Number 4, provide the students with non-routine problems that can't be solved with a memorized formula. So although my previous example of finding the area of a room can be solved with a formula, be sure to present a mix of problems, including those that are not easily solved with a formula. Number 7, allow students time to ask questions and tinker with ideas. Give students free exploration time with the Rubik's Cubes before providing any tips, giving them the opportunity to develop their own strategies and see how the pieces work and interact. And number 8, encourage having a growth mindset. So, what is a growth mindset? Carol Dweck says, a growth mindset is when students understand that their abilities can be developed, particularly through hard work and dedication. This mindset creates a love of learning and resilience. A growth mindset also supports brain development. Every time a student pushes out of their comfort zone to learn something new and difficult, neurons in the brain can form new and stronger connections. So what might this look like with Rubik's Cubes? First of all, allow students time to try their own strategies before offering tips, videos, or the solution guide. Give students problem-solving challenges, like making and solving the checkerboard pattern, creating letters on one side of the cube, etc. And remember to praise the process. Praise and reward the use of effort, strategy, and progress. You may visit our website for more resources. This is Dyer.
So as you saw, what she kind of walked you through in that video, of course, was learning how to, or starting to learn how to solve a Rubik's Cube and kind of doing it step by step. One of the structures that you can use in order to ensure that you are using productive struggle within your classroom and that you're building a culture where you are starting with open-ended questions that have the ability to have multiple solutions is using problem-based learning or even project-based learning. But problem-based learning is a lot more focused on solving a problem and kind of a more narrow focus on a specific topic. And so as you can see, you always start with the standards, then you design a problem, plan facilitation. So that goes back to planning productive struggle and planning for how you're going to facilitate it. That's such an important piece that sometimes gets forgotten, is that when you are going to work with students through inquiry or through an open-ended problem, and you're going to allow them to have productive struggle, planning for it is essential for the teacher. You have to be prepared to guide them so that we're not all getting at a level of frustration where we're at unproductive struggle. So you pose the problem, and if you notice here, this is kind of where you're bringing in, you're trying to help them draw connections by giving them this problem and setting them up to brainstorm and think about connections. Then the next process is that they do a no need to know. So if you're not familiar with no need to knows, that is where they tell you what they know and what information they have about the problem or the question or the project that's posed. And then they ask what they still need to know. It's much like a KWL chart. From there, that allows them to brainstorm. So they start to dig into, well, I know this about this topic already. I'm familiar with this, and they really start to brainstorm. And then that allows them to start to draw in some of those connections also. You give them the individual work time, much like you saw when they were talking about the rubrics cube. And then you have productive struggle, where you do not jump in and save them immediately. You allow them to really think through the problem and try to struggle through it. If you see that they're getting at a frustration level, then you can go over and just kind of pose some guiding questions. And we'll get into what those guiding questions look like in just a minute. But then allow them to collaborate and share. This is how I wanted to solve the problem. And that's where it comes in, where they actually can talk about, well, you approached it this way and I approached it this way, but we still have answers that will work. Then you can move into more group work, and they can try to solve the problem together. At this point, as a teacher, this is where you can really, after they have started working together and they're still not able to solve the problem, this is kind of where you can jump in and start using probing questions or even scaffolding for the students. And some of them may need a small direct workshop to help them really learn a piece of the material that would help advance them further in solving the problem. So at this point, your groups may start breaking off, because you may need to scaffold for one group, but then allow another group to go further. And then allow them to present their problems present their solutions and share how they got there. And this is also an important time to bring in reflection, so that they are reflecting on how they went through that process, and you are explicit about talking about the productive struggle and talking about the critical thinking that had to happen and the times we got stuck and what did we do when we got stuck and how did that feel when we were able to overcome that. We have to always be unpacking productive struggle and critical thinking, because it seems like that they would just do it, right? It's a hard problem. You're going to work until you solve it, but you have to teach that skill, just like you have to teach them to write, or you have to teach them to solve a math problem. You have to teach the skill of critical thinking and productive struggle. So here's an example of a third grade problem, an open-ended, and this one is a math problem, but it doesn't just have to be with math. With ELA or social studies or science, you can throw out a problem or a open-ended question, and they can still approach it the same way. So Gina has 2 quilts. Each quilt has 5 rows with 3 squares in each row. How many squares are in both quilts? Solve this problem any way you choose, then find another way to solve the problem. So on this, you notice that it tells them to solve it and then find another way. And when you give your students problems to solve, I would encourage you to always ask them, well, is there another way that could be solved? Or is there another answer that would still be correct or still work to answer the question, but may not be the first one you came up with? Because then that gives them that skill and that repetition of thinking through things multiple ways and realizing that there's not just one way to solve a problem. And if someone solves it different from you, it doesn't mean that they're wrong. So I'm not going to read each one of these questions, so I hope you guys can read these. But if you will take some time, just a little bit, and I want you to look at teacher A questions and teacher B questions. And then if you can put in the chat, if you're able to do that, which teacher do you feel like is facilitating critical thinking based on our previous problem? Okay, so we have B as, well, 3 B's now. So of course I agree with it. So let's look at the specific components of the questioning. One, of course, the first question is, are the 2 rectangles the same size? Yes. So if you're facilitating critical thinking, asking yes or no questions is not the way to go. Now, not to say that you may never have to ask them, but if that's something you're really focusing on and you're wanting the student to dig deeper, then you're not wanting to ask them open-ended or closed-ended questions. So when we look at teacher B's questions, they start with what shape is each figure? So that's sort of closed-ended, and they can sort of, there may be a couple of ways you can answer that, but not too many. And then as we move, you can see the questions, they get a little more open and a little more deep. So are the colors important? Well, no, or maybe they are. Maybe a student would say yes. They might think the colors are important because it helps them count. What do you notice about the dimensions? So then it has them really brainstorm and to really start to analyze the dimensions of it, and to think about how they're organized. And can you find different ways to get the total number of squares in each figure? So now we're even stretching them further. Well, can you find the way, if I ask the question, can you find the ways to get the total? Well, they could say yes, and then they would say, I will count them. But then we're asking them to find different ways. How many different ways can you find to get the total? And then how can you find the total for both of the figures? And is there more than one way? And so you'll see a common thread here. You're always asking them and extending that thinking in order to teach them how to critically think. Is there another way? Is there another way to look at it? Is there another viewpoint you haven't considered? Constantly asking them to go a little bit further, pushing them a little bit further, and teaching them how that your first thought may not always have all the information. So here is an ELA example. I know we focus a lot on math, but if you're just as a unit overview, so an overall unit question, what was life like in the West for early Americans? And then focusing like specific focus questions. And the way that this would most likely be facilitated is it wouldn't be given all at once, but as we're going through or reading a novel, or as we're going through and reading passages over the West in early America, these questions will be posed. How did the actions of American Indians and early Americans impact the prairie? What was life like for Plains Indians in early American West? And then what life lesson can we learn from the story of Bluebonnets? So even extending that and really making that self-connection based on a story. What lesson did this teach us? So I talked about some probing questions. When you get to the point where the student is at that productive struggle level and you start to see them teeter towards the unproductive struggle and the frustration, it's time to pull in those probing questions. They're useful for getting students more involved in critical analysis. And so maybe they're stuck and they're not realizing why they're stuck. So really probing them a little bit to help guide them along. They're used for the students to analyze other student statements, make a student aware of underlying assumptions, or justify or evaluate a statement. You can use them to help draw relationships. So if they're having a problem and you're realizing the reason why they're stuck is because they're not seeing the relationship between this part of the problem and this part of the problem, then use probing questions to help them start to make those connections between those relationships. And then have students clarify or elaborate on their comments by asking for more information. So that is a key probing question. And that's one of the things that we had talked about before, is that you are going through, they answer the question, and a lot of times we just move on. Great. And what do you think? Or great. And then you move on to the next one. or the next student, but stopping for a minute and saying, well, is there more you want to tell me about that? Or have you thought about it from a different angle? Is there another viewpoint that someone else might have? And really having them extend their thinking by using probing questions. So here is a list, and I won't read all of these questions. I'll have you can look over them, but this is a list of probing question stems that you could have in your classroom, or you could have sitting on your desk, or just somewhere where you see it often, so that as you are working with students and an opportunity comes up to extend their thinking or to really get them to start thinking, then you can use these probing questions. And there's just common ones, and these are, like I said, they're stems, so they're just general stems that you could use for any topic. I really like the one that says, what if the opposite were true, then what? So you could pretty much use that in any situation, in any and really apply that to a lot of scenarios that the students are presented with. So I wanted to end the presentation with a video kind of showing a classroom that they are truly building a culture where productive struggle is part of the classroom. And then once we play the video, I'll open it up for any questions. If anyone has questions or wants to extend or even add to, I'm for sure not a expert as far as I don't know everything about critical thinking and productive struggle. So I want you to pick out the key components that you see in the video. And then if there's any questions that come up, you can put them in the chat.
So the lesson that I taught today, I chose a journal topic based on decimals. The difference between two decimals is 6 and 53 hundredths. What might the two decimals be? Show 5 different solutions.
So we started with the problem about cupcakes, and I just tried to write it with them just to get them engaged about what they were going to be thinking of.
My lesson today was area and perimeter, and the learning goal was for them to find an unknown side.
So you're going to find some areas and perimeters, but you're also going to solve some problems that might be a little challenging for you, like we do in our productive struggle math problem solving notebook.
Kids want to learn and they want to talk about what they're learning. One of the ways that we are doing that is through the productive struggle problems. So we are asking teachers to set the stage of the problem, provide the problem, read 2 ways, and give kids a little bit of time to think about it and process that quietly, but then talk about it and share strategies, share ideas.
One of the key words is I think difference, because that means that you have to subtract 2 numbers to get this.
Boys and girls, can I have your attention? I just want to be clear. Is everybody going to have the same answer?
No.
And is that okay?
Yes.
Keep going.
We are really excited about the work that we've been doing with productive struggle through math discourse here at Butler. When we saw how discourse could improve student learning, we brought that into multiple classrooms across the school.
75 plus 25 equals 100. So the answer should be 25.
I think they're more willing to look at a problem, and if they don't get it, they will look again, maybe they're reading 2 ways on their own or just not giving up.
Yeah, you got that right there, but you didn't get this right here, because you need to add the 75 right here, and then 25, and then it will equal to 100.
Part of what we see teachers doing now is They're walking the room as well as listening to how children respond rather than being in a stand and deliver format.
So 20 plus 25 is 40?
45.
Oh, what?
So shouldn't it be both questions?
Oh, I don't know. You tell me.
I think the biggest change is the kids are taking ownership of their learning and they're talking about it. And I'm always struck by how the kids light up and become engaged when they're talking about the problems as opposed to just listening to the teacher lecture. They are fully engaged and they're debating with each other and they're starting to understand, hey, I have an opinion or I have a reason for my answer and I'm going to share that with you and I'm going to compare that with yours.
That's 13. I don't think that, because the answer would have to be 6 and 5300, so that you would subtract it by a number.
We've seen a lot of success, not just through data, but through those smiles that we see children having this year. And it comes through a lot of work with a really powerful team.
So if we can help our kids to become better problem solvers, then they're going to be a lot better off in whatever job they end up in, whatever college they go to. If they're solid problem solvers, they're going to be well off.
Excellent job. Good job, guys. Give yourselves a pat on the back.
So kind of to wrap everything up, and I know I've talked for a long time, just to kind of say these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. But in order to build critical thinkers, we need to ask open-ended questions, never jump in and rescue the students, allow productive struggle. When they get stuck, use probing questions or collaboration, allow them to collaborate. Explicitly teach what productive struggle is and why it's important. And then always praise the process, strategies used, or perseverance instead of just the right answer. And so if we can build a culture within our classroom that does these things, then that will help our students become better critical thinkers. And I don't know if anyone has questions or.
Yeah, Kelly, I don't know that I have a question. I'm going to make a comment here because it really kind of hit home. Just looking at my own kids, I had one daughter that would just kind of freak out if she didn't know the answer, and the other daughter loved the process of exploring something new and was okay not being right from the start. But she was okay if you asked, well, why? And you just kept building on it from there. She would get there eventually, and she was really good at math. And math is one of those things kids are scared of. And if we can teach them to embrace the struggle and kind of prod them along, they seem to do a lot better. The other comment I want to make real quick is that, I know we have some people here that are in tertiary institutions, and I think that all of this can be modified very easily to any age learner that you want to deal with. And, it may be sometimes, I'm just saying that I've seen it used with everyone. And I think that the idea of creating productive struggle, and I think it works best through problem or project-based learning, is that if you are coaching it well and guiding it well, and Kelly, you do it as well as anybody, and that students both love what they do, but they also learn it at a greater depth than what they would learn in other ways. So congratulations on that. I'm going to kind of wind this up real quick. We appreciate Kelly. What I would like to ask you to do is that if you have not put your name in the chat and where you are, I would like to either get you a professional development certificate, or at least if you're in a tertiary institution in Belize, touch base with your dean so that they know you're a part of it. So put your name and your institution over there in the chat real quick. And other than that, I'm going to stay on for maybe 5 minutes. And I want to thank Kelly Dyer for everything. And I'm sure she would be willing to, if you don't want to log off immediately, entertain a question or two if you want to do that. If you're reading the chat, Kelly, Addie made a comment. I really like productive struggle allows opportunities for students' active engagement and allows for them to take ownership for their learning. Thanks for the presentation. Somebody with the last name Odell said, great presentation, thanks.
And to expand on what you said, Dr. Hickey, when you said that at tertiary levels, it made me think that these are conversations that I have with teachers every single day also, with that, even as adults, you know, really walking through how we approach problems and things like that. So I think most definitely we're still learning how to have productive struggle as adults.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will tell you is that, Kelly, I wish I had a lot of this information when I was a biology teacher in high school, because it would have changed, you know, pretty drastically how I approached a lot of subjects, a lot of things there, and would have just been, I think, a much better and much more enjoyable classroom for my students. And so I really like the work that you're doing. All right, with that, if you guys, like I say, I think I'm getting a few more names here. I'm about to save the chat, but thank everyone for your attendance, and stay tuned. Is that whenever we have these little presentations coming through, I do try to get our Belize partners as well as our East Texas partners, make them aware of it. So we'll be back and doing this again shortly. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, guys. Yeah, Leonoria Novello. I can probably get, Kelly can probably send me the PowerPoint presentation, and I can send it out to the Belize deans because I have their emails. So we can try to do that. So Kelly, if you don't mind shooting that to me. I don't know if it's maybe too big. It depends if the videos are embedded within it. But we can try to get something out there. Ms. Novello, what campus are you on? What institution?
Well, I am in Belize, but I don't know about the campus thing.
Okay.
Because we got the link of the TLI
Okay.
thing
So,
from the Ministry of Education, so I'm not sure.
okay. Yeah, very good. So yeah, also on our email list is Jeannie Garbut is on there, I think, and also Celia Ramirez Smith, I think, is on there.
I think it's Ms. Ramirez, I believe. Yes,
okay.
Sir.
So yes. I will make sure they have the PowerPoint as well that can be sent out to everyone. So
thank you.
Thank you, guys. I am about to save the chat, and I'm going to log off myself. So hope everyone has a great Friday and a great weekend.